Well, welcome everyone. My name is John Miller, Executive Vice President and General Manager of PDS. And today I'll be hosting a panel discussion on a very important topic titled Strategic Technology Planning in a COVID and Post-COVID World. So we brought together a prestigious list of panelists with representation from district leadership and the Department of Instruction. And I want to introduce them to you now. So joining me today are Troy Seifert, Director of Technology, Fond du Lac School District, Dr. Bob Smiley, Chief Information Officer, Janesville School District, Travis Sasilski, Technology Support Program Manager at Kenosha Unified School District, Jim Blodgett, Director of Technology, Middleton-Cross Plains School District, Dr. David Gunlock, Deputy Superintendent, Oshkosh Area School District, and Dr. Annette Smith, Director of Instructional Technology Services with the State of Wisconsin, DPI. So as stated, within this roundtable, we'll explore the contemporary issues of strategic technology planning in a COVID and post-COVID world. So our goal to do so is to do so in the context of discussing three things with you here today. Number one, the lessons learned from the last 12 months. Number two, the remaining challenges in the current academic year. And number three, the strategic technology planning considerations for the next academic year and beyond. At the conclusion, we'll also hear from DPI and get some key advice from them. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So my first question for you, it's hard to believe, but it was really about 1 year ago that our lives changed, right? Our world got rocked. All of a sudden we had stay-at-home orders, which forced us to think differently, not only about our personal lives, but our professional ones and how we teach and how we learn. So let's look back at those 12 months. And as it relates to technology strategy, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you feel were some of your biggest lessons learned from this past year. And I will start with Dr. Smiley.
It's an interesting question. And when I was pondering, what were the lessons that we looked at, it ranges from the mechanical, such as it became critical about sending devices home for kids, but having enough power bricks was like, we had enough devices, but we really had to scramble to find enough power bricks. So it ranges from that mechanical side of the house to the staffing side of the house, and people who are not comfortable with change. If that was also coupled with maybe a level of immaturity, we really saw some behaviors that come out that we wouldn't have normally seen. So I think it runs the gamut from the mechanical to the softer skills of what we saw with people.
Okay, very, very good feedback. Jim, I guess curious what your lessons learned. Are those consistent with Dr. Smiley's, different?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that I probably come from a little different lens just because I'm a recovering network manager. And so there was the point where things were starting to really go sideways, and we were having problems understanding how to plan, because every time we got into a plan, something else changed, and either our parameters changed or the county changed how we were allowed to do stuff, and we had to scrap our plans and move on. I think the biggest lesson that we learned as a tech department was that our processes work when we stick to them. That we were able to, because we've been very disciplined about how we set up our help desk and how we go through our procedures, we were able to take on 50 to 300% more tickets in a given week than we ever had done before. And we were able to meet our SLAs 85 to 90% of the time. And which is kind of amazing if you think about it, because we expanded our help desk from being just teachers who are allowed to submit tickets to literally all of our families could submit tickets at once. And so, we had to scale our system very quickly, had to figure out how to maintain what we were doing as our procedures when we weren't allowed to be in our buildings. And luckily, of course, we have all the tech that allows that, but it was also getting everybody at the point where they were ready to do that. So I think that our biggest lesson was that if we stick to our processes, we're going to be okay. We can pretty much handle whatever comes at us. And I would say that there's also being honest with ourselves about where we are as far as our wellness goes. That as people start to feel that stress and the anxiety and the worry, that we have to deal with those emotions before we can continue to try and just move ahead and work. There isn't put your nose on the grindstone and just stay there, because when the anxiety builds, suddenly you're not able to do any of that work. And so if we weren't taking care of our staff and making sure that they were getting time away, making sure that they were able to have time with their family and be taking care of themselves, not just emotionally but physically, their productivity dropped off dramatically. And so it became really obvious very quickly that we needed to find ways to step away from the stress and the anxiety of the moment and make sure that people were getting time to recover.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think for obvious reasons, we talk a lot about the student experience, right? The learning experience. But I think just to address even some of the mental health challenges that can kind of exist with the staff and the instructor side too, that's a very good observation that you have to be cognizant of that. And it's fascinating. I know I talked with some of you before and even some other people outside of this panel too about the whole support side. Finding those easy wins that you can give to just give people that lifeline when their world has changed and the technology dependency is so obvious. People are working in non-traditional times, they're learning in non-traditional times, or teaching in non-traditional times, and doing it from an environment that's not controlled. So the need for having that technology support, and I think it's great that you had that help desk in place. Not everybody has that. For you to be able to deliver an SLA with that amount of increase is very impressive. And again, I think it gets back to something Bob said too about the mechanics of this. You talked about processes. There's going to be variables, but if you have those two things in place, the variables can fit in there. I think that's a good lesson as well. Dr. Gunlock, I'd like to hear from you here as well on lessons learned.
Well, we realized pretty early on that our work with our Learning Without Limits initiative was going to pay big dividends. So we didn't have nearly as many issues at the secondary level because students were already taking their devices home. There was a process, a support process in place for that. What we had to do was create a zero-touch support process. So that took a little doing and making sure, like we erected tents outside of a given school where they could go ahead and when they needed support, they could drop off their devices. We worked to keep those devices separated for a period of time. All of that stuff had to be created pretty quickly on the fly. That was the easy stuff. I think the tough stuff was the fact that we were a district that was 1-to-1 grades 3 through 12. Grades 3 through 5, they never took them home. They stayed within the classroom. So all of a sudden we had to engineer, even something as simple as pulling the AC adapters out of the carts, was something that we had to do relatively quick. Then we had to figure out what were we going to do K2. We didn't have near enough devices to cover that. So we ordered additional devices right away to cover that situation. Then it scaled down to 4K. What do we do with 4K? And the 4K devices were less about instruction and more about video conferencing so that there could be interaction with the 4K student. It wasn't that they were going to be manipulating all that much with the device, but it was their way of doing what we're doing right now in a separate environment. So we ended up adding the board graciously approved additional funds right away so that we are now a K-12 1-to-1 district. And that worked out pretty well. The support structure had to be re-engineered. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be because we collapsed from having 20 different support sites to 3. And then people would go ahead and drop things off. In Oshkosh, we also spent a lot of time feeding families. That was honestly, if you want to take the number one thing we did that was kind of tech related, but not really, was we were delivering meals. And how that interfaced with how we did tech support. So they had meal delivery and technology delivery at the same site with the same protocols.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that helped us quite a bit. We were able to provide that service, and that was 7 days a week. So that gave us a little bit of extra support capability, is that we had somebody there delivering those meals. They could collect technology that was broke or needed some servicing at a moment's notice. So
that's a brilliant idea.
Well, it was out of necessity because we had specific protocols for the meal delivery. We just had to piggyback on those protocols. The other thing that we eventually pivoted into is we had 7 students in our E-Academy. Within a span of months, we pivoted to over 1,000 students in our fully virtual E-Academy. So we had to restaff our entire district in a span of 3 weeks. And we scraped off, Oshkosh is a very frugal district, and we don't have a lot of staff sitting. I don't think anybody has a lot of staff just sitting around. But it was one of those cases where we had to go ahead and move the staff where the students went. And that was probably the most disruptive thing we had to deal with.
Okay. All right, so a lot to take in there. I'm curious, I want to ask you a follow-up question. We talked about approaching your board. Now, obviously, COVID wasn't a planned event for us last year. And in many ways, then a lot of the financial burdens that each district had to take on were unplanned events as well. Any lessons that you can take away reflecting back in these last 12 months about how to work with the board, how to communicate with them, or even how to make the plea for funds that weren't planned for, I guess?
Honestly, in our district, when this transpired, and we've had a history of that in Oshkosh, when there's an emergency, the board is very much a get it done. We'll approve what we need, get it done. And so we got quick approving for the funding. I think the federal funds that were coming really helped that. So they knew that we would figure out the budgeting. We knew some federal dollars were coming. Mm-hmm. Our big problem was we probably could have spent those federal dollars 3 times over. And so we had to realize we were getting this amount. And the K2 units ate up $500,000 of that in one shot. So the board was very supportive about that, but they had a lot of good questions. Mm-hmm. When we come out the other side of this, are we all of a sudden going to have a big issue? And that's our job, to make sure that we're staying within budget now as well as into the future.
Very good. Thank you very much. So Troy, I want to give you an opportunity here as well. You had saying lessons learned is kind of an interesting thing for you when you started in this position on July 1st. So you also have the reflection of working with multiple school districts preceding this assignment, but I'm really curious to hear from you on your lessons learned.
Yeah, so it was, an interesting choice to make this move in the middle of a pandemic, but it's worked out well. The reflections kind of do span back to the previous district, and, it's all about the things that have already been mentioned. That remote support, in addition to students and staff, it's now parents putting in those help desk tickets. What do those protocols look like? Early on, it was a lot of that non-touch. How do we make that work at an entrance? What does that look like? And some of that was melded with some of our food-related drop-off and pickup locations as well. But yeah, coming into new district July 12th, I'll be honest, the first month was all about survival and really learning the new district, especially one the size of Fond du Lac, which is fairly large. Really, for me, it was the lessons, having that tight hold on what your inventory looks like, especially coming in somewhere new, right? It was approaching my staff, thinking about how do we get a handle on this. Here's what we're looking at starting the new year. We've started out the year with cohort model. So we had cohorts A and B. So some kids might be at home part of the week, some kids might be at school. And then we also had a part of our population, which was, I think, right around 20% that chose fully virtual learning. So we were adjusting on the fly to all of those things. And our access was not equitable. So we were also thinking about what did we need to order? How do we scrape together devices that might be near end of life to get those to students who are in need? And then the other thing that I reflect on is trying to understand the needs of the community. What does Wi-Fi access look like in the homes in our community? So I think something that was really helpful for me was the technology related questions that we were able to ask during online registration through Skyward, and get that picture of what does that look like at home for our students and families. So as I reflect back, it's, a lot about, logistics and figuring out where you're at with inventory, thinking about equity a lot going forward. But yes, it's been an interesting last 10 months for me, John, I would agree.
Yeah, not a typical first 10 months for any start position, but you made it through. So Travis, you've had the opportunity now to hear from everybody else here too. I'm curious where things may have differed. And obviously, there was a lot of social events in your district that took place last year too, just on top of all the COVID things. But any other observations you want to offer on lessons learned?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to everybody else. We kind of always wanted to go one-to-one. This forced the issue, of course. So we had about 18,000 Chromebooks that we had on hand that were in carts. So kind of dismantling those carts and getting all those out to the families, to the students. We've ran a hybrid model for most of the year. There's been a couple full closures, but distributing them Chromebooks was a huge part, and then also identifying who needed hotspots. So we ended up buying about 3,000 hotspots. But the biggest lessons learned definitely was keeping good control of your inventory. Help desk had to be revamped as far as like one-to-one support. We kind of just jumped into it, of course. So it was something we had to learn along the ways with creating ticket systems geared towards one-to-one support. So
good points. It's interesting you bring up the control of inventory. I'll admit, and you folks know, I work with numerous school districts in the Midwest, and I'd say that's an area that a lot of people weren't as mindful about during last year. I think in an effort for so many to just quickly just get technology out and make sure that people were connected, that some of those best practices that otherwise would be in place kind of got abandoned. So it's good to hear that you were able to do that. I think in a time where a lot of other people have struggled with that and are trying to make that up right now. I see Jim and Bob both shaking their heads. Was that a problem for you, Dr. Smiley, starting with you?
It was certainly a topic here. Yeah, for sure. The governor announced on Friday the 13th that schools were closing on Wednesday the 18th. And when you're looking at districts our sizes with the populations that we have, it was an all hands on deck. I'm proud of the team. We got it done, and we got it done with I think as much integrity as possible. But I'm nodding my head because it was a scramble, and I can't imagine what it was like for a business like PDS to also have to scramble. But we all made it through, at least so far.
Right. Jim, and I saw you kind of observing this too. Any other comments
and
there?
We were in the same place, right? We weren't one-to-one last March. We were about, we have 7,500 kids, and we were about 2,000 devices short. And so to start, we knew that most of our families had devices at home. And so we only gave Chromebooks to people or to families who needed devices. And still, Dr. Smiley's right. On Friday the 13th at like 5 o'clock, the governor announces, and then a half an hour later, our Dane County Public Health changes our plan from being what the governor said to being, you're going to be closed on Monday. So all of our kids are already gone. We have no chance to give anybody a Chromebook. And so, that next week, we just basically figured out, how do we get all these families Chromebooks that don't have them? How do we even find out which families don't have them? Because lots of times the families that didn't have devices are also the families that didn't have internet access. And so they're not responding to emails. And so there was a point that first week of April where I'm literally standing on a hill in southern Madison, just handing out Chromebooks. Someone comes up and says, hey, I'm a student at whatever school, and I look on my list and I'm like, okay, here's your Chromebook. It was a pretty crazy time. And so, when June comes and we're trying to figure out where do all these devices go? There was a lot of stress there, and just trying to figure that out, and knowing that budgets were going to get tight because obviously the state's going to stop bringing in revenue. We're probably going to have students that that pull out of our school district because of what's going on within our school district. There was all that stress of trying to figure out how much stuff do we need to buy, and then middle of July, when can we even get our stuff, right? That all the stuff we ordered in May is all of a sudden back ordered, and no one can tell us where any of our supplies are. So that whole figure out that part of the inventory. Luckily, my staff is extremely detail oriented, and we know how to use spreadsheets, and we know how to use barcode scanners, and we've actually been able to now line up one-to-one every student that's got a device with the device they have within our inventory spreadsheet, or within our inventory system that sits inside of our help desk. So we know who's been assigned a device. Hopefully that's the device they actually have. And of course, because we're Google, we can actually check that against the who's logging into those devices. So I actually have a couple of staff members that are just making sure of the ones we're not positive about, what device students are actually using. And that was another, I guess, one other lesson that we learned, because our district said we're going to come back face to face at some point. And we don't want to have to rehire everybody, especially paras, especially support staff, because they're very hard to hire anyway. And so we found work that was good, productive work for them to do basically throughout the spring and then into the fall, because we were virtual until the end of January. And so I actually picked up 3 food service staff to work in my department, basically managing phones and, doing a lot of this kind of like detail work, which they're really good at because of the job that they had before. And having them help me like make sure that we knew where stuff was, calling families. And Troy is also right that in Kenosha, I'm sure that the problems are much larger than they are in Middleton, but we have over 100 families that we're providing internet service for. And so to figure out like how to do that and how to pay for it and like who needs what and is the service still working for them? Right. Is really important. And so being able to leverage those staff and to put them into a productive role where they really became our interface to our families to get the information that we needed, because everybody felt, well, I don't know, I felt like I was in a cloud, that I could see some things, but for the most part, I was guessing at where things were. And there still isn't that really good clarity that I'm used to around technology.
Yeah, and you touch on something that's obviously very sensitive too when you talk about equitable internet access, and that's been a problem pre-pandemic, and it only got magnified during this. We could probably spend a few days just talking on that alone, but again, some improvements made on that as a result of this crisis. I want to move on to the next subject, but it looked like Dr. Smiley, Dr. Gunlock, you both maybe had another comment you wanted to share there. David?
The only thing I was going to say is there were some real silver linings throughout all of this. One of the things was Oshkosh made a decision in 2014 when we passed our referendum to give every student a device, regardless of it. They were all going to get a device, no matter what, and that's what they were going to use. When the pandemic hit, there were a lot of victory laps being taken about the wisdom of the Oshkosh community to do this. And boy, is this useful. And probably a half a dozen times at public board meetings, people were saying, thank goodness we had this, because if we didn't have this, we couldn't do anything. Right. And if there was ever a time where it really hit home, the idea of consistent access and the work we had been doing, that was it. Secondly, the Wi-Fi access, you're right, it was one of our biggest challenge. We provide access to 500 homes that we had no budget for, and we had to amp that up pretty quick. We did something very similar. It was Friday the 13th, and all of a sudden we're like, we may not be coming back on Monday, so get all those devices unhooked and get them home to kids. And our teachers did a wonderful job with that, because they did all of that in a span of a couple hours.
Wonderful. Yeah. Bob, it sounds like you had a comment here too. I want to make sure.
I agree with everything that Dr. Gunlock said, and that there's a lot of silver linings to this. We talk about, well, it's forcing some educational reform, because now we're sort of forced to be digital, and we've discovered how well we can work in a digital environment. I have some new numbers as of today that shows our printing usage for 2020 went down 50%.
Sure.
So people have discovered they can be digital, and in the past they would have fought me tooth and nail on why they need to print so many millions of copies a year, but in truth we've discovered we actually didn't have to.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You're using the term silver linings out of this. I think there's some other things that I've seen here too, and you hear the comment about digital transformation, right? And talking to some of you and other leaders, that I've talked to, they talk about how we got more done in a 3-month period or a 12-month period than we did in the last 5 years or 10 years. You hear a lot of comments like that. I think about what the role of learning from home will be moving forward. Some are going to offer that up permanently, but what does a sick day mean anymore? Is that going to be kind of more of a standard now, where we're going to allow people to be able to have this access moving forward, or people who have, a home environment where maybe their parents are taking them traveling more, they don't have to be disconnected from the learning environment as a result. David, you talked about earlier. Oh, I'm sorry.
The same thing that as you're saying, we've had a lot of conversation about, will we ever need to have a weather day, whether it's a snow day,
Right.
or,
Exactly.
but why can't it be a virtual learning day?
Exactly. And I think some of this too, what's fascinating is in many ways, another silver lining is the fact that you're able to now just leverage technology that you've already invested in. For a lot of people, it's turning on technology that already sat there idly, whether that be cameras or collaborative tools. And I think the other thing I just wanted to mention here before we move on too is just personalized learning. Well, no question, many people struggled, with learning comparative to being in school. We also found some others that actually excelled in this environment. And I think that's been the promise of adaptive learning, is finding the right way on an individual basis. What is the learning style of that individual? And this may present more opportunities for that moving forward as well. I do want to shift into some of the other questions here. Great topic. Again, we could go a long time on any one of these here. But I want to talk about kind of the rest of this academic year. I'm talking to some of you beforehand. Many people are at that pivot point right now where you're switching from what you started the school year with into something different. So whether it be that or other priorities, I'm just curious, what are some of your focus areas that you're working on to still impact this current academic year? And Troy, maybe I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I think now that we're back 5 days a week, I think one of the items that has come up is what happens when there's a quarantine, whether it's at a small level or a higher level for a whole class. And I think now that we've been in this cohort model and there's been some kids learning remotely, I think we're better positioned to get those devices out to kids, make sure there's that equitable access. Do they need a hotspot? So I think it's making sure that we've got some of those protocols in place when some of those quarantines may or may not pop up. We think about too, technology capacity, what that looks like moving forward, what PD continues to be needed moving forward for our teachers, whether it's, video conferencing or learning management system, et cetera, and figuring out both in the short and long term, what do we need to invest in terms of a budget for those pieces. So
good. Travis, where's your head at these days as far as what you can do to still impact the experience for the instructors and learners this year still?
Yeah, so right now we are working to swap out 3 grade levels, 3 cohorts of Chromebooks to get new devices in their hands, kind of get the newer devices, better battery lives and stuff like that. And, also that professional development too, it always looking for additional online resources and different things for teachers that are teaching virtual. Another thing too is we're also running lists against, because we have a parent choice. So some people switch between virtual and in person and don't necessarily need a hotspot. So we're looking at lists of recouping some of those hotspots and redistributing into families that might be going virtual or different and need internet access. So.
Well, I ask you a follow-up question on that. When you talk about professional development related to the teacher side, could you just elaborate on that maybe a little bit more on what are they looking for, or what have you identified as an area to help?
Yeah, so most of our school district utilize Google Classroom quite a bit, but now we are grades 3 through 12 Google Classroom, and then using Seesaw for PK through 2. So kind of getting more familiar with different Google Suite products. Not all teachers used Google Classroom, or even whether it be Sheets, Docs, everything else related to that, online quizzes, stuff like that, and trying to get videos and tutorials and stuff like that to more familiarize educators with that. So. Okay.
Good, very good. Thank you, Travis. Jim, you kind of cited before too, being in Dane County's provided another level of governance regarding kind of what you can and can't do, in this too. But I guess as you look forward for the rest of this academic year, what are some of the things that you're focused on?
Well, I would say that right now we're really focused on getting our kids back into school, at least in the cohort model, the AB model, and also doing concurrent teaching. And so that, students at home are actually receiving live instruction right now through Zoom, and we'll be moving to the enterprise version of Google Suite this summer. I think though that brings a fair amount of complexity to it. And I'm also a recovering math teacher. And so I actually spent a year teaching pre-calculus students on a distance learning network. And it's not an easy way to teach. There's a lot of effort and mental fatigue that comes from trying to manage students remotely at the same time managing students physically. And also, the technology that we can afford is not really the technology that we need. And so there's a fair amount of compromise that comes with, sound quality at the far end, or, handling things like delay and jitter and echo or outright feedback that come with, not really having a strong understanding of how sound works with microphones and speakers. And so what we're doing right now is really spending a lot of time with teachers, just helping them learn how the technology works mechanically, and then teaching our instructional coaches about how to teach in an environment where your kids are, at a distance and on premise. And of course, all the things that go with, being in Dane County and since still being a hot spot for COVID, and making sure that we're wearing masks, making sure that we're social distancing, making sure that we're embedding all the behaviors around controlling respiratory, controlling, where your hands actually go and what you're allowed to touch. And there's all those pieces that go into it. And then helping our administrators at those buildings understand they still have to follow not just the COVID safety protocols, but our other safety protocols. The fire drills still have to happen. Active threat drills still have to happen. And we have to figure out ways to do that to keep our kids safe. And at the same time, make sure that we're understanding that this is a pretty vulnerable time for us because there's so many distractions. And that we need to make sure that our students understand the protocols, our teachers understand the protocols, and our administrators understand the protocols, and that they're disciplined in sticking to it.
Very good comments. Thank you for that. Dr. Gunlock, I think you're about a week from opening up more. Is that accurate, or you just recently did? Tomorrow. Sorry.
Back up to a fully in-person 5 days a week. Yeah.
Okay. Good luck.
Well, Jim talks a lot about distraction, and part of our distraction has been our community, just like many communities, have been really pushing for opening. At least some of them have been pushing for opening in person 5 days a week, while you still have another chunk that's trying to get you to stay not doing that. So we've tried to stay separate from that. And I don't mean to minimize it, but the hardware pieces are really, we have that in hand. We've got the support pieces done. We have the hardware for the kids. It's all fine. What we've really done, and we've found, is we've pivoted our conversations. And this is part of that, blowing through 6 years of barriers in 6 months. Our conversation is really focused now on state-of-the-art instructional design. In other words, now that we're using an LMS and we're continuing to use an LMS, how do we put the right energy and the right thought into designing the instruction to leverage the LMS? And even when we're back in person, we're designing digital first. So we're designing for a full virtual mode while sitting in person 5 days a week. And that to me is one of the biggest silver linings we've had, is teachers are now starting to understand it really doesn't matter the quality of the content I'm putting up if the student can't find it. And if the student can't intuitively figure out where to go, and more importantly, if the parent, who is often now helping the student, can't either. So we've really pivoted our design to, we've reached out to our students and our parents. We've gotten really good input from that. And at the same time, we are using Canvas as our learning management system 612. We piloted it this year for K-5. We were using Google Classroom. Well, we piloted it K-5, and that has really prompted those discussions. So the pilot schools have come to us and said, look, we've designed the actual Canvas courses this way, and we feel every course ought to be designed this way. Content will be different, but so parents don't have to relearn 5 different learning management styles and systems. And that connection has been where we've focused most of our time this year. We initially, at the end of last year, we focused on getting hardware and Wi-Fi hotspots into the hands of kids. But we solved that problem. That's just ongoing how we do business now. The next stage was now working with our teachers to say, okay, how do you design something that in a learning management mode from virtual to in person is easy for the learner and really drives it home?
Very good. Yeah, I think that bleeds into the go forward strategy then too, right? That's going to have a lasting impact. Dr. Smiley, I'm curious to get your thoughts here too. I think uniquely compared to the rest of the panelists, you folks have been in school for a while, pretty much with the least amount of disruption as far as hybrid or virtual. So just curious from your standpoint, where your focus is at regarding this academic year.
I've heard, and you know, Dr. Gundlach was talking earlier about how their virtual school got bigger. Our virtual school got a lot bigger like his did, and that has presented a lot of challenges. So we're on site, we're active, and yet we've got all these virtual kids. And so it's this, and the movement of staff that Dr. Gundlach talked about has been really huge. So as we've looked at it, regardless of whether you're in that virtual school or you're in our own school or you're flipping back and forth or you're a high school student on an A-B schedule, it's how do we keep kids engaged? We've really seen a decline in like some of the kids who live in our most challenging households. How do they stay engaged? You know, there's a lot of distractions, there's maybe not a lot of familial technology understanding or support. And so for those students who are marginalized, really keeping them engaged and really keeping their learning up has been that's a long-winded way of saying really keeping the kids engaged has been our challenge.
Sure. So, I mean, taking all this collection of this conversation here that we've had to this point, and now it's like, all right, how do you apply these lessons we've had from the last 12 months to what we're working on right now, and then start to have that foresight on how to move from survival to strategic, I guess would be the journey that we're going on right now, right? And, you know, I think Dr. Smiley, as you're even reflecting, as somebody who's had their doors open longer than everybody else on this panelist, it doesn't mean that you haven't been virtual that whole time too, right? So I think that's part of an obvious statement at this point that some level of virtual is here to stay. But I just want to ask I guess, a little bit of an open-ended question. As you're thinking about next academic year, so 21 to 22, what are some of the things that you're thinking about, even next academic year and beyond, that are now your areas of focus? And Troy, I'll start with you.
A lot, John. No, you know, equity keeps coming to mind. I think we've got to get better with our equitable access to devices, particularly at our elementary schools. And it's not to point fingers at anyone. It's just where we're at currently. We've been one-to-one at our high school for 7 or 8 years. We were kind of more or less with that silver lining forced into the one-to-one at the middle school. It was cart-based previously. Now it's take-home. Talking about how do we continue that, or do we continue that moving forward? But at the elementaries, it's not very equitable. So how do we get that equitable access? We want that consistent experience for all kids across the district. That's really important to me, and I think everybody else. And then 2, how do we keep providing that Wi-Fi access to those families who are in need at home? And then our hotspots, the long-term answer. They're probably the answer still in the short term, but you know, are we looking at some sort of LTE network that students can have access to? You know, there some bigger districts across the country have delved into that. So a lot going into mind here. And again, because I'm new to the district, there's other things that I'm thinking about, like, you know, getting a handle on processes, inventory, and things too. So that's just kind of where I'm at right now.
So the list is pretty long, right? And I know we're going to kind of save a last question later for Dr. Smith, but I think one thing you've each talked about at certain points here about the equitable access and that, and I'll be curious a little bit later on for Dr. Smith for you to comment on that.
I'm trying to hold my tongue and wait my turn.
I'll give you ample time to respond to that. Travis, let's hear from you about your strategic planning for next year.
I think for Kenosha Unified, it's kind of sustaining the one-to-one program, and being that we just jumped into it, getting a refresh cycles for, devices. We're looking at doing a 4-year refresh cycle. So, and then another one is, of course, we got a lot of devices out there. So keeping track of damages and what the best approach to that is, and, the fees for damages and things like that, maybe insurance policies and stuff like that. And then also just kind of fine tuning our hybrid option because, you know, I kind of foresee it being out there probably next year too, but at least we have experience from this year and just fine tuning it even more. So.
Yeah, I'm curious because you brought the subject up before about professional development. As you look forward next year, are you re-envisioning about how you can collect feedback from technology users to, I guess, have a more versatile PD plan moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. There's been a lot of district surveys that went out to both staff and students and then the parents too and guardians. But yeah, it's definitely crucial to collect all that feedback, you know, from even administration of the buildings too, to see, you know, what has worked this year, you know, what PD that we provided has worked, or what do we need more of, you know. Part of that is maybe looking at some kind of LMS system where, you know, I know we do have Google Classroom, but I do like the idea of having something like Canvas or something that, you know, has better tracking analytics and stuff like that too.
Okay, very good. Dr. Smiley.
You know, we've been talking about how do we sustain what we've learned this year and bring it into so that we want to gather everything that we've learned, that we've done well, and make it a part of what's going forward next year. One of the most recent thoughts was that we really want to make sure every school is practicing their digital days or their virtual days on a regular basis. We had some schools before we pivoted, you know, so we were 100% in session, and we had some schools that were practicing those digital days ahead of time. And while when they had to pivot, they just did it with so much more integrity. So many fewer problems. The student engagement stayed higher because the kid knew what to do. So whether you have an LMS like Canvas or using Google Meet, but they know where the documents are at, they've actually been able to ask the teacher, because we're still in the classroom, we're having a digital day and everything's online, but we're practicing. So when you're home, that piece, we have found that to be a huge success piece about practicing so that when we need to pivot, everybody knows where everything is at.
Very good. Good.
Seems simple, but it was key to a lot of stuff.
Okay, very good. Jim, thoughts for next year?
Yeah, and I think, you know, following the line of silver linings, we've been working on equity, well, since I got to Middleton, right? We've had multiple different programs, and we've done a lot of things and have failed to move the needle where we needed to move the needle. And our Black and Latinx kids, you know, read far below their grade level for the most part. We struggle most with them, keeping them engaged. And so our goals for this year were to bring those students' reading levels to their grade level. And we did that through, or we're working on doing that through what we're calling C3 teams, a co-learn, co-serve, co-teach model, which when we hit the pandemic, it became obvious that no one teacher could do all the work for their classroom, that they had to stop being, you know, contained and start working as teams. And I think that's the model that we're trying to really make sure that we continue to support moving forward. And in fact, all of our decisions now are based around, is this going to help us meet the goal for all of our Black and Latinx kids to be reading at grade level or not? And if it's not, then we're not doing that thing, right? We're focusing all of our energy, all of our resources are going to be focused there. And so there is going to be probably some heartburn as we remove resources from areas where they've traditionally gone to focusing them on meeting the goals that we know are really important for our kids. Sure. And I would say that all of that kind of feeds into the idea of how do we develop curricula that is truly engaging, like Dr. Smiley was talking about, that often you can tell right away and I know as a teacher, I could tell right away that if the topic that I was trying to teach didn't resonate with my students, they checked out, right? The windows are open, but the kids are not there right now. And I think having some tools that help us understand that engagement, but really having ways to connect to families in a deep conversation about what's working for their child and what is not is really, those are the things that we're really working towards. And you can't expect a high school teacher with 180 students to be able to do that. But you can expect that a team of high school teachers, along with our student and family engagement specialists, can figure out how to reach out to, especially to the kids that are not being successful or have disengaged because the content doesn't resonate with them.
Yeah, but very, very interesting topic. I think when we talk about family engagement, we obviously know the role and the impact that that has towards positive student outcomes, but it's the one thing that is outside of the control of the district and very, very different from household to household. And I think that, again, became more exposed when people were having to learn from home. So I think it's very important that you're addressing it the way that you are. Thank you for doing that as somebody who lives in your community. Dr. Gunlock, last but certainly not least.
There's some logistical things for next year, obviously continuing to try and focus on how do we get broadband universal into the homes. Troy talked about that, and we're looking at that as well as, these hotspots, while they're certainly filling a need, that's probably not a long-term solution. What's interesting to us is as we focus on instructional design as an organization to get at our learning outcomes, we found that our disengaged students this year were the families, because we noticed they were disengaged. We went to them and they were the ones that helped us do the best redesign. They were the ones we found out they were disengaged largely because of these reasons. And we began to redesign how the courses were laid out in the learning management systems and the support teams in process to be able to serve them. And I think that's going to carry over into the future. As Dr. Smiley said, having digital days practiced, we were fortunate about a month before COVID hit, we actually practiced a digital snow day. And people thought we were a genius all of a sudden because they could just replicate that. Well, that's, we were lucky. We weren't really a genius, but it was good to have. We'll continue to do that. I think the rest of it is going to focus in on personalized professional development, taking what we've learned in terms of how do you design things in an LMS and use it with our own staff. We found that to be very reinforcing. And teachers give us great feedback when it's easy to learn something in a format like this. They realize, hey, I can use that with my kids and it will be easy to learn as well. So, I do think we need to be agile because I don't think COVID's just going to magically go away. I think there's going to be flare-ups, and I think there's going to be variants, and there's going to be some things that happen for a while, and we're going to need to pivot back and forth. Our teachers are used to doing that now. Our families are used to doing that now, and I think we'll be able to carry it off very successfully.
Good. And just some constant themes I'm hearing when I kind of put some of these together. If I could just try to narrow the words down into some things, but I hear a lot of focus for equitable, a lot of focus for agility, a lot of focus on professional development, and then I guess what I would call true stakeholder recognition. Recognizing that you have a multitude and a variance of stakeholders who are part of this overall learning solution. So I guess trying to simplify all the different things I'm hearing here, I think those are some of the themes that carry forward. I know we're closing in on our time here together, but I do want to make sure that we also talk a little bit about government's role here. So Dr. Smith's long been a friend of us here at PDS, and I'm happy to have her here as well today, representing Department of Instruction for state of Wisconsin. You heard a lot here today, Annette, and just curious to get some of your thoughts representing the state here.
I heard some things that really made me smile because behind the scenes, there are some things we've done that you're all using. And that's the role of government, right? It's to be able to look ahead and have some things prepared for you. It's be able to look at what's happening in the moment and be a support and put supports in place for you and to prepare and support you as you start for the next school year. So talking about equity, right? There's two big themes I'm going to talk about. One is equity. And we were working and have been working for years. I've been in this career field in many of you as colleagues when I was in the K-12 tech director role. And we were talking about broadband inequity 15, 20 years ago. I mean, I see you nodding. And we could not get anyone to listen. And all of a sudden, people are listening. And we took advantage of that moment. And at DPI, we did things like talking across the states to come up with a common set of questions that are in Skyward now that Troy used to talk to his students, to get that information about who needed broadband and how they needed it. And we worked really hard with the other states to get common questions so that when we talk to vendors, and there's people in this room that know we have been talking to vendors again and again and again about what they need to do to provide that quality access for those students who don't have it. And we could use that data that you gave to us, that data that we're collecting as a state through your student information systems, because of that work that happened behind the scenes through DPI. And we talked to those student information systems, Skyward, Infinite Campus, Power School, and got those questions, those common questions that could be used in every state. And by making sure they were common, they were willing to embed them. And they did it in like a month. That never happens. Anyone who understands student information systems, it takes a year. We have to ask them to make changes 12 to 18 months ahead of time. But they did it in a year or they did it in a month, because we had it standardized, we worked through those questions, and it was out there for you. Equity, we know where the problems are across our state, but knowing and having data are not the same thing. So not just the questions, but doing things like the speed tests to prove where it isn't working in neighborhoods, to partner with the PSC at the state, so that when those vendors were not meeting your needs, we could work with the PSC to talk to those vendors. There's not a vendor in Wisconsin that we are not talking to all the time. We didn't have a lot of money because the money went to the schools, but DPI got a little bit of money from the feds and from the governor's budget. And we use that money to incentivize and to incentivize our schools and to incentivize our districts to build what's called the Digital Learning Bridge, which I know many of you are using to buy those hotspots. So there's some money from us to put towards those hotspots. And there was money to incentivize the vendors to give a discount if the schools paid the bills. Never before had schools been allowed to pay the bills. We got that rule put in for the money that's coming to you. You can now pay for that internet access. It used to say you could get a hotspot and no internet access, which made no sense. So we were able to advocate and help to get those changes in place. So those are the kinds of things that we were doing early on that we now have in place that will be sustainable over time. Because as Dave was wrapping up and saying, parents have a different expectation of you all now, and things are going to look different in the fall, whether or not there's still a pandemic, because they now know what you can do. They now know that if I'm sick and I don't want my student in the school because they're going to make me sick or they're going to get sick, you have ways to educate them that you had not offered us before. So there's this whole different view of what schools can provide, what businesses can provide, what government should be providing. So I'm thrilled to hear you say you're using those things, that we worked really hard and we were at a full run to provide for you, because that's what government should do. And we continue to do with the speed tests and providing data and building maps so you can use those for grants, advocating in the governor's budget for more funding so we can get more of those grants out there to build in areas where you don't have access, to advocate for the federal government to provide funding for those buses you're parking on the edges of your districts for those areas that don't have access. So all of these different things that we're trying to help support. The other piece really talks about student and data privacy, because somebody, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which person, mentioned all of a sudden there were all these apps and all these things and you had to kind of rein that back in. You had to get to one information system, one learning management system for your parents' sanity, for your family's sanity and your own. And so we worked really hard early on with the Student Data Privacy Consortium and with districts to try to get contracts that had that language in them. Zoom is an example. We worked really hard with Green Bay School District with the Student Data Privacy Consortium to make sure that as you were trying to run, we were getting language in the contracts that made sense for you. So you didn't have to be individually negotiating all of those contracts. That's the role of government. That's the kind of thing that we can do to help. And so I'm hoping that you're all using the Student Data Privacy Consortium and that standardized language that we now have in there. We're working across all of the states to try to come to agreement on a national contract. So then you don't even have to worry about it from Wisconsin, but it would be across the nation. That's all in process, and hopefully we will have for you soon. So we've got the Digital Learning Bridge, we've got the collection of data, we've got the Student Data Privacy Consortium. And then the last one really nobody talked about, and this is where it's our job to be forecasting and helping, and that's incident management. You all have been doing incident management, right? That you've had all of these different things that happen. I have to close this grade tomorrow. That's an incident, right? You're trying to figure out how to do it. Mm-hmm. There have been, the FBI has collected data, and we know that educational organizations are the #1 place that hackers are going for ransomware, right? That is you are the #1 target right now. You're data rich. They want your information. And so this whole year we've been working on helping districts develop incident management plans. We have been really trying to support the cyber response team, which the state has, which will come out and help you if you have an incident. And we are trying to make sure that you are prepared. So when those incidents happen, because they are going to happen, they've been happening across our state. We have way more examples than I care to have to talk about. And when you're in a virtual environment and you've been shut down, you can't get on the internet, you can't get in your school, you can't get your cameras up, your phones don't work, you have no way to communicate with your parents. That is not a pleasant place to be. And we've had multiple school districts have that happen this year. And so trying to make sure that we have resources to support you through those, and that you know how to reach us, and that we can make that happen quickly for you. So those are, I think, kind of the big picture things that both we should be doing and we are doing. And then the last thing that I would say is listening. When you call us, we are listening. When you talk about what you need, we are listening, and we are trying to find ways to build those supports. I mean, this is new for us too, right? And just like you, I run a tech department that had to get 600 people working from home because the governor gave the same order for our building. One day we were in it, the next day we had to be out, and everyone had to be working from home successfully. And so modeling and learning with you as we go through some of these processes. And if we are missing something, and I'm saying this to you in the room, and I'm saying this to the people who are listening to this at Brainstorm, you need to tell us. You need to communicate with us. We may not succeed. We are not perfect. We have failed. I can give you many failures from this past year. I'm sure you all can do that, but we will try, and we also have successes.
Thank you, Annette. And I'm just so thankful for someone like you in the role that you're in, with the experience that you've had, the connection you have throughout the state of Wisconsin. It's I couldn't be more pleased to have you, not just as part of panelists, but you in the role that you're in for the state. As a citizen of the state, I'm very appreciative. And with that, I just want to say thanks to all of you. I know we're closing in on our time here, but such a wonderful group of panelists. And I know your contributions today. Hopefully you're getting something out of this here too, but I know our broader audience listening is getting a lot out of this here today. And just on a personal note too, I just want to really say thank you for what you really do on a daily basis. I have a very unique lens into your world in that, I'm an education technology provider. I'm a father of 3 current students, and I have a wife who is teaching hybrid today. So I have a fairly clear view, I should say, of what you go through on a daily basis. And I don't know how else to say it than to say the work that you do is it's heroic. I mean, the learning that took place this last year, it doesn't happen without your leadership, your moxie, all the things that you do to shine through this pandemic. And you're presenting unique challenges over this last year, and your leadership, your adaptability, and just being true partners to the instructors, to the students, and the communities was very, very evident. So obviously I want to say that at a professional, but I also want to say at a very personal level that I'm just very appreciative for each of you and what you bring to our communities and to me and my family as well. So thank you for that. To all of you listening today, I hope you found great value in this as I did. And with that, we'll conclude our session, and I wish you all a great rest of the day. Thank you.